Hi, friends. This is Jordan Harmon, a compassionate behaviorist, and want to talk to you about and share with you kind of an introduction to emotion regulation skills in DBT. So first, I want to just talk overall about emotions, period. Emotions are pretty fascinating. Um, I've been thinking more and more about emotions as kind of an organic algorithm. Algorithms are kind of in the zeitgeist and all the rage and influencing us, these computer-based set of instructions that are increasingly powerful in understanding us and predicting our behavior and even shaping our behavior, sometimes in ways that we don't like. Um, so how are emotions like an organic algorithm? Well, think about emotions as not one thing, but rather of an evolved and developed full system response that is taking input in from our environment and from internally from our own experiences and processing it so quickly and then signaling us and giving us instructions and kind of urges and motivations throughout our physical system and throughout our communicating to our environment. So it's a really powerful, almost magical system. And a lot of people, most people who are seeking out DBT therapy or therapy in general, or just struggling in life, oftentimes emotions are part of the struggles. And the idea is that we're basically not very good at learning to work with our emotions. It's not something we teach. It's not part of reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's not something we oftentimes learn how to regulate our emotions from watching people around us, especially our parents and other peers when we're young. And sometimes that works. And sometimes there's things that get in the way. And as the world is changing more and more and more and more quickly, our environments, our social environments are adapting, social norms are changing, and emotions are harder to regulate at times. So luckily, DBT has a really fleshed out system of skills and ways of thinking about emotions that are all backed by the best, latest science. This is in other types of therapy too, but the therapy I'm coming from right now with this is dialectical behavior therapy. But first, we want to just talk about emotions and what they do for us. And I'll kind of outline what I'm going to talk about in this video by sharing my screen here and show you in DBT. Emotion regulation skills are one of the four modules that we teach of skills. And there's four main goals of the module of emotion regulation, and those are found in these blue bubbles here. So the four main goals of regulating emotions are: one, we want to understand what our emotions are doing for us and name and be able to name and label them. So that's the first kind of goal of our emotion regulation skills in that blue bubble there. Then we also want to learn how to decrease unwanted emotions. So some people might hear that and say, no, like we don't want to decrease emotions, we want to accept them. That's definitely a big part of DBT, is accepting emotions oftentimes does decrease them. But there are times that we get stuck in emotions, and accepting them might not decrease them. Or and it kind of depends what we mean by accepting them, right? But there are ways to activate behavior or to change behavior that will also change emotions. There are ways to understand the components of the emotions and then figure out ways that we can actually decrease unwanted emotions when needed. Decreasing unwanted emotions doesn't mean they're gone forever. Like, we need them. It just means in a certain specific situation, there are ways to, in a more healthy way, change or decrease unwanted emotions. Then we want to decrease our vulnerability to emotion mind. This one's interesting. The way it's worded here on the screen is decrease emotional vulnerability. Like, anyone who's a fan of Brene Brown or kind of in the world of, being more emotionally vulnerable is going to question this goal. The idea isn't to not be emotionally vulnerable. It's more of, there are times when we're more vulnerable to extreme emotions that make it difficult for us to be effective in what we need to do or want to do. We want to decrease our vulnerability to emotion mind. So everything in DBT is, right, finding that middle path balance. If we're too emotionally vulnerable at times and places where it's not helpful to us, then we might putting ourselves at risk in different ways, right? Like there's a time and place to be open, to be emotionally vulnerable, and there's a time to regulate and kind of how do I hold it together, right? And the more we're able to kind of do that effectively and kind of see the balance of when we need to, that's going to be helpful. Decreasing emotional vulnerability has a lot to do with things like taking care of our body. It has to do with really connecting with what matters to us in the long term, and moving in those directions. And then decreasing emotional suffering. So that's when emotions get really intense. There's a lot of emotional suffering, a lot of not knowing, what to do with our emotions, and it's getting more and more intense. There's skills to go with that. These yellow bubbles are basically the skills that go along with these overall goals. So I'll do videos for all of these, but right now we're going to focus just on the far left goal, understanding and naming emotions. So first, to understand emotions, we have to understand that emotions, that there are purposes for them, evolved functional purposes. There's researchers talk about three main functions to emotions. Three. So the first one is that emotions motivate us to act, or they urge us to act. Every single emotion that you can think of comes with an action urge, right? So think of different emotions. Think of anger, sadness, fear, love, jealousy, shame, guilt. All of them, they all come with urges to act. And in different situations, those acts, those behaviors that emotions are urging us to might help us survive, especially if we think back to like our shared ancestors tens of thousands of years ago that were living in, kind of Paleolithic conditions and hunter-gatherer conditions. It was really important for them to be able to respond to threats with fear responses. It was important for them to respond to the potential of breaking social taboos with shame responses that would keep them from doing that, or keep them from doing things that would get them banished from their clan. It was important to respond with disgust to foods or people that would contaminate them or that were poisonous to them. And those same emotions are still relevant to us today. However, we're not necessarily facing the same existential threats, right? So we have anxiety disorders, or we have disgust responses to our bodies or to foods that are healthy for us. So a lot of our what we call disorders, whether they're anxiety disorders or eating disorders or things like that, depressive disorders, are, you could think of them as having to do with strong emotional responses that aren't fitting the environment, and yet they're powerfully, self-reinforcing, and then causing this kind of loop for us. And so learning how to work with our emotions is such a critical, I'd say, like almost like a paradigm shifting way of being, a way of seeing our emotions as Rumi says, guides from beyond. There, we can learn to work with them. So again, the first function of emotion is motivating us to act, right? Doesn't mean we have to go with the action. It's just we want to understand that any emotion we're going to feel is going to motivate us to act. I'll do some other videos specific to emotions, but you can just think of the highlights of, like, disgust urges us to spit something out or move away from something that could be contaminating or toxic or poisonous. Anger urges us to become intimidating, more to become big, to become to advocate for what we want, a specific goal or value, or to stand up for something, someone else who's being treated wrongly, or ourselves. Fear helps us to get away from or fight off a potential threat, or to freeze in the face of a threat. Sadness urges us to draw within, to signal to our community that we've lost something, right? To mourn, to connect through mourning, shared grief, which kind of reinforces the sense of what matters to us. And but it is a sense of drawing inward, reflecting, mourning, grieving. all of these emotions can be important in their different contexts. And so knowing that they're trying to do something helpful can help us be patient and be aware and see, is it helpful in this moment? The second function of emotions is that emotions communicate to other people. This is really interesting because a lot of times in the kind of pop psychology, pop psychotherapy world, people will say things like, your emotions are your emotions. They don't need to affect other people, or other people's emotions are theirs. They don't need to affect you. It's actually not true or not realistic. It might be helpful for us to be able to tell that difference and regulate our emotions in the context of other people feeling different things. That's definitely helpful. And emotions are meant to affect other humans, especially other humans in our group. And there's a lot of interesting research done here, like the polyvagal theory of Stephen Porges and others who have looked at different emotion and kind of nervous system responses in different animals, from reptiles to mammals to ultra social mammals like humans. And we find that as living beings have, as vertebrates have developed, mammals began kind of wearing their emotions on their faces, and kind of as they became more social and more grouped in packs, mammals have a more externally facing emotional responses. So that facial expressions, eyebrow expressions, body postures, things like that are really meant for the people around you, right? And so that is one of the functions of emotions. It communicates to people around us. And you can think of examples of why that would be important. Why would it be important to be able to see that someone is really angry, right? You might keep your distance. Or to see someone that's really sad, someone that you care about, you might go towards them and comfort them. So we are affected by each other's emotions. That's okay. That's normal. That's not bad. The third purpose of the third function of emotions is signaling to ourselves, right? So emotions are telling us something's wrong or something's right. Emotions are telling us, oh, I need to figure that out, right? I might need to get away from this situation, or I might need to worry about how this person's going to perceive this or this, everything from what we wear to a job interview to, what kind of shoes or gear we take on a hiking trip, or what kind of precautions we take when we're getting ready for a road trip. Emotions are involved in very subtle ways of nudging our decisions and helping us problem solve things to reduce or prevent fear or embarrassment or shame, breaking social norms, or of connecting with someone or something that we love. So it signals to us, which is similar to the urge, but it's a little different than the urge to act. It's more of just the initial signal, right? So again, three things: urge to act, communicate to others, signals to ourselves. And I'll show you just a brief kind of slide on that here. So, right, we have motivate to action, communicate to others, communicate to ourselves. And again, you can think about these emotions, and it might be that in your own experience, when you're feeling an emotion, you're having a different response. Like, well, when I'm feeling sad, I'm not connecting with other people in grief. Maybe I'm, acting in this way that's maladaptive, or I'm taking a nap, or whatever it might be. So we develop all sorts of behaviors to cope with these emotions, but in their basic form, there's a similar urge to act, for human beings. And then it might take on different forms that are maladaptive or adaptive in our own situations. All right, so now about that. That's on page, just so you know, if you're a DBT person and you have the second manual of the DBT handbook, this is on page 210. The handout's called What Emotions Do for You. If you're not, that's okay. You could seek out a DBT therapist if you want, or buy the skills handbook, or you could just watch videos like this to learn more. So What Emotions Do for You is page 210, and I just went over that. So now I want to talk about there are things that get in the way of regulating our emotions. There are very understandable obstacles to regulating our emotions. And so I want to I'll show a slide that has to do with that. This is, again, from the DBT handbook on page 211, although these slides are not from that handbook. These are just one way of thinking about it, or one way to represent it with images. So the main 6 obstacles to regulating emotions. The first, biological factors. Some people are just more physiologically, biologically sensitive to emotions in the same way that some people are more likely to get sunburned. And it's an inborn trait. Most people who are seeking out and benefiting from dialectical behavior therapy are people who have this inborn trait of emotional sensitivity. So they feel emotions more intensely and they're slower to return to baseline. So these biological factors can be inborn. There's also biological factors like physiological factors, like how much sleep did I get last night? Have I been eating food? Are my blood sugar levels balanced? Am I hydrated? Am I physically ill or not? Have I been moving my body? All of those things you can think of as things, if you're a parent, that when your toddler, when your 2-year-old is most distressed or most likely to kind of throw a tantrum, they're more likely that in that moment they are either hungry, tired, they need to move their body, get the wiggles out, they might be sick, maybe they need some connection or some attention or to be held. So, but there's some really physiological factors there in terms of things that'll make us more vulnerable to emotion dysregulation. So that's one. Myths about emotions is basically like the ways we think about emotions. So myths, you can think of it as faulty beliefs, right? Like a myth about emotion could be some emotions are good and some emotions are bad, right? That's a faulty belief, not a helpful way to think about emotions. Or I should be happy, right? That's, a judgment, and also like not a realistic thing for people just to, I should be happy and so I should be. Humans feel and experience all range of emotions. So there's a whole lot of ideas and that we've learned from our cultures, from our experiences, from people around us that are faulty beliefs about emotions, and those can get in the way of us regulating emotions. Another way of thinking about this is a lot of people who struggle with depression are struggling not just with depression, but they're depressed about being depressed. A lot of people struggling with anxiety, they start having this thing of like, I shouldn't feel anxious, right? And then they're starting to get worried or anxious about being anxious. So, CBT therapy and DBT and other therapies really work on changing these narratives, changing these ways we think about our emotions. Reinforcement, right? Reinforcement is the behavioral principle of what comes after a certain behavior, including emotions. Experiencing emotions is a type of behavior. So what comes after those experiences of feeling and expressing emotions will reinforce, sometimes unnecessarily or inadvertently, will reinforce emotions, right? That emotion state. So if we're getting stuck in sadness, but if that's the time that people in our life do care about us, and then when we're doing better, they kind of, we kind of start feeling invisible again, even though the person's not purposefully, trying to be depressed to get attention or to get love, it's very likely that those emotional states will become reinforced. So this principle is tricky, right? There's so much of DBT is thinking behaviorally and trying to understand what is maintaining this stuck behavior or stuck emotional state that I get in or that my loved one gets in. And the whole principle of contingency management is the principle of being able to shift around, the reinforcers, right? Not just paying attention to people when they're in crisis or when they're depressed, but paying attention to people when they're doing well. Not just, giving ourselves a break when we're overwhelmed, but like giving ourselves more intermittent breaks and time for, positive experiences in between. So reinforcement is really important, and this is another kind of paradigm shifting thing to really start thinking behaviorally about what actually is maintaining behavior. And one of the reasons it's paradigm shifting is because we become aware of how we're not as freely choosing the things we're experiencing as we think, right? We like to think of ourselves as just freely choosing everything we're doing. And yet, when we're struggling with getting stuck or emotion dysregulation or difficult patterns, then we start just blaming ourselves like, I shouldn't be doing this. I know better. Rather than understanding that behavior is caused, that oftentimes the causes aren't what becomes before the behavior, but the causes are what comes after. The reinforcers or consequences naturally occurring that shape our behavior. So another thing that gets in the way of regulating emotions is just when it's too much, emotion overload. Um, that is something that a lot of us experience, and it's like you can't even think of what to do, and you just feel out of control. So there are skills for all of these, and this is just more of the overview of being able to maybe validate too that regulating emotions are difficult, and there's a lot of things that get in the way. Lack of skill, right? Here's the picture kind of representing lack of skill. Sometimes we just don't know how to do it. We haven't learned it. It's not sometimes people pick it up naturally, but a lot of us, it's not something we teach. Like we teach times tables. We don't teach emotion regulation skills as overtly across, in our cultures. You basically have to find yourself in a therapy program or something like that. So lack of skill. And then moodiness is basically another word for that in terms of the way DBT is positioning this is willfulness. Kind of like, I know what I need to do. I just don't want to do it. I don't want to regulate my emotions. One way of thinking about that too is emotions in some ways almost have a mind of their own. And when they get dysregulated, it's like they want to stay in power. Imagine emotion being in the driver's seat or in the passenger seat. We're driving the car. The emotion's there. The more it's becoming dysregulated, it's like it wants to take over the steering wheel. And it doesn't want to give it back up. Right. So that kind of like sadness wants to expand and go global. Anger wants to expand and go global. Shame wants to expand and go global. Resentment or bitterness or self-hate or jealousy, all of these things, when we're getting stuck in them, it's like they want to spread. And so we don't want to kill them off to regulate. We don't want to throw them out of the car. We want them to take a spot in the car or in the bus. But we want the wisest, most valued, clearest part of ourselves driving the vehicle, and the emotions to be there and to take turns in the passenger seat to help navigate. Because there are times where we need to feel anger and recognize something's in the way of a value or a goal, and I need to problem solve this. There's times we need to feel disgust, right? When we're taking our dog on a walk and picking up her poop with the plastic bag. Our disgust response is good. It helps us to be safe and clean in doing that. Every emotion has a role. We don't want to kill any of them off. We don't want to throw any of them out of our experience. We're going to become more stronger, more psychologically flexible, more resilient when you learn how to work with your emotions. So these are the obstacles to regulating emotions. Do we want to do more? Yes, we'll do a little bit more. So one last thing here. And just so you know, that was page 211, and then the myths of emotions. If you have the book, it's 212 that you can go over. And then for those who have this DBT book, there's emotion regulation handout 5 on page 213, which goes over a model of emotions. I'll just show you a picture here. Page 215 of this, or 213 of the DBT skills handbook. The thing that's to me most important about this model of emotions is it really outlines how emotions are not one thing. It's like it's many things. It's all these different components. So it's like I keep having the image of Howl's Moving Castle. If you've seen that Miyazaki film, it's this castle that's like this moving castle. It has all these working parts. And the idea with this model of emotions is that rather than trying to change the whole thing, the ways that people learn to do that are usually pretty harmful. Like if you really want to change your emotion powerfully, it's like people have to get into really harmful addictions or behaviors, self-harm behaviors, eating disorder behaviors. And those things can change emotions really dramatically. And the long-term consequences, we just get stuck. We get less and less flexible, less and less resilient, more and more fragile, less free, right? So the idea here is understanding emotions as this vast kind of network of components can help us. So what are the components? The components include, I'm going to bring this up here. So some of the components, prompting events. So that's like the triggering situation or the cue. Our own attention or awareness is a component, like our own ability to perceive, right? So a prompting event won't necessarily prompt emotion if we're not aware of it. So our awareness is a component of the emotion. Our interpretation of the event. Our interpretations are sneaky because we don't necessarily recognize that they are different from the event themselves. Like something happens, we're talking to someone at work, a boss, we perceive that they're mad at us, and then our interpretation is they hate us. My boss hates me, or my boss is such a jerk, right? We're perceiving that as the same thing as the event. So we want to be able to separate. These are different components. There's a prompting event, the facts of what happened that everyone would agree on, then our awareness, then there's interpretation of what happened. Then there's vulnerability factors. That's like we're not arriving to any event in a vacuum. There's already stuff that's been going on. How much sleep did I get last night? Have I eaten breakfast today? What's going on in my life? What other stressors are going on? Or maybe even in the distant past, there's things that happened in my childhood that are still affecting me. Or maybe I suffer from depression or borderline personality disorder or PTSD. Whatever it might be, we all have vulnerability factors that are different at different times. And that's going to change. That's part of the component of our emotional response. Biological changes, right? Brain changes, nervous system changes. Those are components. And then our experiences of like our sensations, right? When we have an emotion, there's certain physical sensations and then action urges that are coming up. And then there's expressions, right? So like if we're angry, our eyes might narrow. If we're shocked or scared, our eyes might go big, right? If we're feeling loving towards something or someone, our eyes might be there, but in a more kind of intense, kind of interested way of looking. Our cheek, facial muscles, our mouth muscles, all of our muscles, our shoulders, our body postures, all of these expressions are part of our emotions, right? So instead of changing the whole thing, we want to understand all these components, and you can change just one component and it'll have an effect on the whole system. Our actions, the things we actually do in response, right? That's part of the emotion. The names of emotions are part of the emotion, right? So emotions, again, this is big biological, cultural thing. After effects, right? What happens after? What are the consequences of the emotions? Because those are likely to reinforce or punish whether we engage and act out that emotion the next time. So, lots of stuff here. Emotions are way more fascinating than we realize. I think reading, writing, arithmetic, and emotion regulation, emotional intelligence, I think that would be amazing if that was taught in our schools, that every year people are learning about emotions, how to work with them, how to understand them in other people, how to be effective with them. So this is the first kind of lesson related to emotion regulation, and kind of some takeaways here. Another thing I'll just share is just some characteristics. I think this is also from the DBT training manual that Marsha Linehan published. Emotions are complex, a lot of different reactions happening at the same time. They are automatic. They're involuntary responses to internal and external events. They cannot be changed directly. We need to change events and subcomponents, but not the emotions directly, right? And how many of us think that we should just change them directly? I shouldn't be feeling this way. He shouldn't be feeling this way. Just stop feeling that way. No, but we can change them by preventing or changing the events causing them, and also changing subcomponents. Emotions are sudden and they rise and fall, right? So they know emotion lasts forever. Emotions are self-perpetuating. They love themselves. They want to grow. They have these components that we talked about. They're interrelated, but they can be examined and addressed separately. Some emotions are universal and others are learned. So some are very automatic and others we might learn and have conditioned in us over time. So wrapping up here, emotions are powerful. They can be your friends. They can even be your guides from beyond. You don't have to be afraid of them. You don't have to do what they say, and yet you can listen to them. You can invite them in. You can learn to be with them and to work with them. So thanks for watching this video. If you have any questions, feel free to comment, or if you have any thoughts about this, any of the content here, there will be other videos kind of covering the other emotion regulation skills. This is the first part, understanding and labeling emotions. Hope you are well. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other, and we'll see you later.